Okay, hello everyone. Today we have a very special guest here. We have Luciano, and today we're going to be talking about how to become a principal engineer, what's the path to get there, and what is the process to get there. So, Luciano has been working as a software engineer for more than 10 years, right?
Hmm.
And he's also international speaker. So he gave talks in Europe, he gave talks in the USA. He has also an amazing book about Node.js. I know that most of you are Java developers, but I also think that's very important to know more than one language because if you do that, you become a better engineer. And I'm going to be sharing his blog as well so that you can access his articles and you can learn a lot from him. So thanks a lot for accepting the invitation, Luciano. And how are you, man?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And also, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm really delighted to be here today. And I hope I'm going to be able to provide some, I guess, useful insights to my experience as a principal software engineer, and maybe something that can be valuable for people if they're interested to follow a similar career path.
For sure, it's going to be. I'm really happy to have you here. And it's a privilege to have you here in the Java Challengers Initiative. So thanks a lot for accepting the invitation.
Likewise, yeah.
Awesome. So let's start with our first question then. I'm curious to know, Luciano, did you have the goal of becoming a principal engineer? Did you have like some plan to action to get there, or it happened naturally? So, Henny, can you deconstruct this process for us?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And to be fair, I don't think I had like a very straight path. It was a combination of luck and I don't know, maybe having the right opportunity at the right moment. So if I look back at 2 jobs ago, I was kind of a senior full stack engineer. And I was, at that time, I was thinking, okay, maybe at some point I could be a principal. But then I changed company, and in that company I was again kind of a senior full stack. And then after 1 year I was promoted as a cloud architect because I was doing a lot of the groundwork to help the company to move some deployments to the cloud, and I was doing a lot of architectures because of that. So I got more responsibility in that front, and it was super interesting. Especially I enjoyed in that specific role that I had a good combination of not just being an architect as let's draw some diagrams in the whiteboard, but actually implementing the architecture and trying different things and benchmarking. So it was a very kind of hands-on role in architecture. So something that maybe not so common. And I found out that after that job I was looking for the same type of experience, and it was very hard for me to find a job that was hands-on architecture type of role. I've seen either companies where you could be like a senior or principal engineer and you do a lot of coding and hands-on stuff, or as an architect you are more the guy that takes the decision and reviews architecture but don't do a lot of coding. So I kept searching for that kind of job for a while, and then at some point I realized that if I had to pick between either being just an architect as somebody that designs and doesn't implement, and be a software engineer that is very active, I would have preferred the path of being a principal software engineer. So I didn't really have like a very straight path. I was kind of undecided between architecture role or principal role, and between the two, since I really like building products, I thought that role was more ideal for me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for the details. So, tell me, why did you choose to? I believe you told me a little bit of this process, but so you said that you didn't want to be an architect because an architect would be more on the decisive side of the role, and you prefer the action, you prefer coding, and you prefer um, developing things and making things concrete. But would you, for example, consider being a manager as well, or you think it, or it would be the same thing? Like to be a manager, you wouldn't be building. an application, you would be doing more of administrative tasks.
Yeah, that's another good question. So I never wondered whether I will be a good manager or not. Like being a manager seems even more detached from building products. Maybe it's more about building teams. And I don't think I have the skills to do that yet. Probably I don't even have a strong interest right now. So I don't know. I don't see myself as a manager in the near future, which doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Maybe in 5 years' time, I will realize that I can do a lot better as a manager rather than an engineer. So maybe that could be a career path in the future, but not in the short future. I would say regarding architect versus principal or software engineering in general. I think it's more of a market issue that lots of companies decide that they want to have an architect as somebody that only does design and planning and stuff like that and not implementation. But I think that's just an arbitrary decision. It doesn't mean that there aren't companies out there where if you also have the skills to design and build something, you could then be an architect in that role and do both things well. And to be fair, I think that if you can do both things, you probably get a much deeper perspective, because you might have an idea that in theory works very, very well, but only when you go into the implementation details, you realize that maybe there are tweaks or things you can do to improve the architecture. And if you only look at the high level, you are never going to see these improvements. So maybe I really wish that there will be more companies that would allow that kind of role where you can do both the design part and also the implementation part. In that case, probably I would prefer that, because architecture is definitely an area where I can grow more and learn more. So that will give me a lot of kind of pointers to get better at even designing architecture and not just trying to build products.
Yeah, and I know that in the principal role, there is a responsibility of designing an application as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, the companies have the role of principal engineer, and the principal engineer can also code, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Which,
most of the companies define these roles this way. So principal is more of an engineer with a lot of experience that can also do more kind of design type of task and looks more for scalability and other things that are kind of a lower seniority type of engineer maybe wouldn't do. They will just stick to coding the specific requirements. But then when they define architects, most companies are like, okay, your role will be to work with a team that is going to do the implementation, and you will help them with designing the architecture, which seems very detached from actually implementing that architecture.
perfect. And Luciano, have you ever thought about being a tech lead, or it's not really something that you would enjoy?
I don't know. I think I've done a little bit of that in my previous job, just because I was hired as the second employee in a new office. So at the beginning, when we were hiring people and I was onboarding, I was doing, I think, some of the tasks that a tech lead will do. And I don't mind doing that. But again, I feel that to be a very good tech lead, you are kind of going slowly into the management path. Like you need a lot more skills, like, I don't know, empathy, making sure that your team is doing okay, which maybe I have, maybe I don't, but it's just something that I never really investigated that much. I don't know if I will be very good at it or not. So I'm not excluding that for the future, but right now I want to grow a lot more as a software engineer and maybe getting more and more the elements of what it takes to be a good architect.
Awesome. Um, and talking about management, it's also important to mention here that Luciano also had his startup company, and probably you learned a lot about that, right? When you had your startup.
Yeah, so to be honest, and I think I always make this disclaimer when everyone says, "Oh, you had a startup." I want to say it was a massive failure from kind of a startup perspective. But on a personal level perspective, I think it was the almost 3 years of my career where I learned the most. Like, because the amount of things you are exposed to and the amount of uncertainty and the amount of times that you have to just step outside your comfort zone and do something because nobody else is there to do it for you will basically give you many chances to learn stuff that otherwise you will never learn. I do remember, just to make a silly example, that I was very scared about dealing with servers. Like at the time, I felt like I was a decent enough full stack developer, but I never really did spend a lot of time trying to bring things to production, just because I never to deploy the startup application somewhere. I was like, okay, we cannot do this. We need to hire somebody. And then we didn't have the budget and we didn't have the time. We couldn't find anyone that would help us for as a kind of co-founder with this kind of expertise. So after a few weeks, we were like, okay, we have to do this. Like there is no other way. And I remember that at that point, I kind of started of learning about, okay, this is, I don't know, how you run an EC2 instance on Amazon. This is how you SSH into it, maybe how to create an image so you can have a more reproducible deployment system. And at the beginning, I was not thinking I could ever do this kind of job, because for me, I'm just a developer. I don't know anything about this stuff. So long story short, I think that having a startup, it's a good experience because you will need to do many things that generally you wouldn't not necessarily want to do, but you wouldn't have to do. There you really have to do them, and therefore you have many more opportunities to learn new things.
Yeah, well, I believe that well, every failure in life is very important for acquiring wisdom and understanding uh, what you can do better. And this is like maybe the most painful way, but it's the fastest way for growth. So
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
so yeah, this is part of the process. So
Yeah, that's totally true.
awesome. So let's talk about technology then. In your opinion, what are the most important technologies to focus to become a principal engineer?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't think there is like 100% accurate answer. It probably depends from the company you're working with or the type of engineering that you have been doing mostly in your career. For instance, I've been working mostly on the web, building web applications, mostly as a full stack engineer. But doesn't mean that, for instance, if you are a system engineer, you cannot to say, okay, just learn these technologies and eventually you will become a principal. I think it's more of a general seniority type of thing where you have seen many different technologies, many different frameworks, and you can be flexible enough to understand, I don't know, how to troubleshoot a problem or how to approach a new, even technology that you haven't seen before. Maybe you, as somebody that has experienced many different technologies, you will have more elements to quickly ramp up on that new technology. So I will say that in general, just be curious. So just try to give a little bit of time to yourself to learn about new frameworks or new languages or new technologies that for some reasons are interesting in your space. And then from those, you can probably learn new techniques and new ideas, which will kind of grow in your mind, and you will be able to learn new things faster in the future.
Perfect. So what you mean here exactly is that we should look for fundamentals or look for I can use the word pattern in the market. So for example, with microservices, we're going to be always using monitoring. We're going to be using observability. And then we can identify, okay, what tools are we using for doing observability? What are the fundamentals behind the scenes? Why we are doing that? Or for example, if we are using the cloud, why are we using, for example, a load balancer? Or why we are using containers? Why we are using Kubernetes, for example? So if we understand why of those technologies, and if we understand enough to be able to develop something with those technologies, that's a great step already, because nowadays we know that there are so many technologies, right? And understanding at least one technology that solves one problem, that is a massive help to learn another one that does almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, just to add a little bit more depth, for instance, if we just stick to programming languages, there are like, I don't know, hundreds of different programming languages, right?
Yeah,
But if you start to group them in categories, you probably have a much smaller number of groups. For instance, you might have object-oriented languages, you might have more functional languages, and even just being able to know one language of one category and one language of the other should give you enough depth, let's say, for you to understand different paradigms and patterns. The next time you're going to look at a new language, maybe it's kind of a mixture of the two, you definitely are going to have enough concepts to bring different ideas together and learn very quickly that language. For instance, one language that I read about recently is Elixir. Like I only created an hello world, so I literally don't know anything about Elixir. Like I wouldn't be able to build a product, but just reading through the book, since they explain a lot of about functional programming, for instance, the idea of recursions or the idea of all the operations over a list that you can do through recursion, just doing that, you learn a lot about functional programming and the different ideas behind it. And that's something that maybe I'm going to be using my next JavaScript program, because I'm going to be working on a specific problem where the functional pattern makes it easier for me to develop that specific functionality. If I only stuck with, I don't know, object-oriented programming, maybe I will never realize that in a specific case, there will be patterns that are more suitable from the functional programming world. And of course, you can apply this logic to many other things like architecture, I don't know, cloud versus on-premise. Like if you really understand the pros and cons and the main patterns, then you have a lot more building tools that you can use when you are creating something new.
exactly. So we don't really need to learn every single cloud technology. If we know one well enough, we can far more easily use another cloud provider, for example. And the
Mm-hmm.
same rule applies to, um, for example, databases, or like you just said, programming languages. If you learn a language that uses the paradigm of being object-oriented programming, then you can learn another language is that uses the same concept more easily. The same way that if you learn the functional programming paradigm, you can also switch to another language more easily that uses the same paradigm. Um, the same thing happens with security. Security is another thing that's very important to learn. So if you know the fundamentals of security, if you know them very well, you can more easily learn about different technologies that use the same concept.
But there were one thing that I want to mention as a kind of note to what we just said is that it's very easy to do the mistake of trying to learn everything at the beginning. So everything I just said doesn't make a lot of sense if you are starting to learn now. If you're starting now, my advice would be, okay, what do you want to be? A web developer, a mobile developer, I don't know, DevOps. Try to figure out what is your career path and then try to learn one single technology for what you have to do and get very good at it. Only when you feel very proficient. For instance, if you want to be a web developer, maybe you pick Java. When you feel you are very, very good with Java and you can build products very, very quickly with that, maybe at that point it starts to make sense to explore something else. And you don't have to become an expert in that something else. It's just something that can give you new ideas that you can even try in Java itself. So that's my suggestion. So don't try to become an expert in everything. Still have your core strengths. When you nailed your core strengths, then yes, it's good to explore and learn a little bit of new things, because those are going to make you better even on your core strength.
Exactly. Yeah, very well said, Luciano. Very well said. I think we talked a bit briefly about that. But in
Mm-hmm.
your opinion, what are the main responsibilities of a principal engineer?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it might depend, because I've seen companies where principal engineer is a little bit of a more autonomous figure, like somebody that can decide to work on whatever makes sense to them. So they can decide, okay, I think I can have an impact on this area rather than this other one. so I'm going to focus my time on that specific thing. While there are other companies where a principal is somebody with a lot of experience in a specific team with a specific goal and mission. So probably the answer to the question depends on which structure your company has. If you are kind of a free principal engineer and can go everywhere, or if you are focused on a specific problem. In general, I think that I don't know, you have to be able to solve hard problems. So problems where other people with maybe less experience, they could get easily stuck. So you need to be able to, if you're working in a team, you need to be that kind of driving force that can help people to unblock. And at that point, everyone can work together better. Also, you could be someone that can kind of proof test specific solutions. So you need to understand, okay, this is a good design, this is going to scale or not. If there are doubts, you need to be able to help people to set up tests and figure out, okay, we are actually proving that either this thing works or doesn't work in this specific scenario. And if it doesn't, what kind of other solutions can we explore? So in that sense, it's still trying to be that force multiplier of, okay, maybe there is a solution, but can we make this solution better? Or can we make it cheaper? Whatever is the target there that can make a huge impact for the company.
So, Luciano, what are the 3 soft skills that you think that are the most important skills to become a principal engineer?
Okay, so the first skill is probably the ability to learn, to be able to kind of move around some code base you don't know. So for instance, maybe you joined a new company or a new project and you are working on something that you didn't write yourself. Maybe it's a new language or a new framework. So I think it's very important for a principal engineer to have enough confidence on and understand patterns that will allow you to just navigate the project and make sense of it to the point that you can quickly become a contributor in that project. And this is a mixture maybe of just experience, because if you have seen a lot of different projects, probably it's going to be easier to learn new ones, because at the end of the day, you're going to see similar patterns. And also there is a soft skill there in the sense that you need to be able to learn quickly and be able to step outside your comfort zone and try things that you are not necessarily very good at. So that's definitely a soft skill. Yeah. Another soft skill I could recommend to kind of invest on is don't focus only on your technical strengths, but when you work in a company, try to understand what are the company goals at a business level. So this is more on the execution side that will help you out to, whenever you're working on a project, to really understand what are the top priorities, where is more important to invest your time. If you can take a shortcut, probably it makes more sense to take a shortcut in something that is not the main priority for the business, right? And I've done this mistake myself. Like when I was in the early days of my career, I was just focused on the code, and whatever the requirement, I will try to write the best code ever and maybe spend months on building a feature that maybe was not the most important feature for the business. So I think as a principal, you need to understand where to draw the line and where it makes sense to invest a lot of your time, and maybe because it's a priority for the business and needs to work very, very well, maybe where you just need a tactical fix or a tactical feature, you can just do something quick and dirty and move again to what's important for the business. So that's definitely on the execution side. Try to have that feeling of what the business really needs and combine that with your technical knowledge and expertise. And finally, there is one that is probably more on the leadership side. And this is what I will define that as you have to be like a force multiplier. And that to me means that as a principal engineer, you definitely work with other people. You're not going to work in isolation. So try to understand where you can have an impact on other people's work. So maybe you see somebody that has specific strengths or weaknesses, and you can help them either to maximize their strengths or to cover for their weaknesses. And that can be, I don't know, maybe mentoring, or maybe just helping people to kind of use you as a rubber duck and propose ideas. And then you can try to give them feedback or make questions and help them out in basically becoming better. And I think that's very important for a company, because as a principal engineer, you can help to kind of drive the entire engineering force forward. Because if everyone gets better, even by 1% in a company with many engineers, that's a huge improvement. That's a huge multiplier for the company.
Amazing. This is very, really, really powerful, what you said, Luciano, to improve other people's lives and improve the company as a whole. I
Yeah,
think,
this is something you can do even if you're not a principal. I mean, this is a good attitude to have in general. I think as a principal, it's even more important that you do that.
yeah, that's for sure. And you also mentioned something very important to focus on the business as well. So, do you have strategies to figure out what is important to the company? So, what do you do exactly to find out and to know what is really important to the company and to the business? What actions can developers
Mhm.
take to figure out about the value, the business value for the company?
Yeah, this is something that sometimes might be a little bit outside your control. So it depends the type of company you are working with. I've seen like very big companies where it is harder to get that level of visibility. You just get things to do, and only in few occasions you can have the chance to talk with the right people to try to get more of the business context. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do it. There are always avenues where you can discuss the business requirements. And I think there is one easy way that you can basically try to get more about the company, what the company wants to do. And that's literally just always ask why. So if you get something to do, you can ask, why are we doing this? Like, what are we trying to achieve? And maybe it's an obvious question, maybe it's even a dummy one, but you might find out a lot of things that you didn't expect just because you are asking, why are we doing this? And sometimes you can, at least I have seen this in previous companies, where by doing that you can even contribute back to the mission, because you might help different people in different roles to realize, okay, you are actually making me realize that maybe the why that I had in mind, it's not that important. Maybe we should actually do something else. So in that sense, try to not necessarily question in a skeptical way, but it's more in a genuine way. You want to find out what is the driver for a specific piece of work that needs to happen in the company. And at that point, you can help to prioritize it, and you can help the team to understand, okay, this is something we need to do quick and dirty because we need it right now and it's one off, or this is something super fundamental, all the business needs that, and the business is going to fail or succeed based on that. So of course, these are the two extreme, but most of the time you're going to be somewhere in between, and just try to understand where you are will help you to understand how much effort you should put in that specific work.
Perfect. This is very important because sometimes we ask why, and then we find out that this task we were trying to do wasn't even necessary,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's very important to ask why, because sometimes we do something that is very complex but shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it's just a matter of asking why and understanding better what is the business value exactly. Very good point. Awesome. So, Luciano, what a senior engineer should do or behave to become a principal engineer?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think in a way there is an element of experience. So probably the main thing is just a lot of patience. Try to work on as many projects as you can, work with many people as you can, so you can kind of learn more from different people and different projects. Then on top of that, again, just trying to be curious and not be, so learn something very, very well, but then also explore other things that are not your core knowledge. And we already mentioned that. And maybe one thing that I could suggest is not like mandatory for everyone, but I think can help you to gain some of these soft skills that we just discussed. I think is have a side project, at least one. I mean, you can have many, of course, but having a side project, it's something that is gonna could potentially push you a little bit to explore things that you don't explore at your work. Because every company is specialized on something and there are only so many things you will see in your company. If you are curious about something, maybe you don't have a chance to do that at your job. So a side project can be a good opportunity for you to explore things that you don't get to do in your main job. So that's maybe another advice I could give to people. And in general, I've done it myself and I found it very interesting for me to, a very interesting excuse for me to learn new things.
Exactly. So a side project is awesome. And if you can do something that you enjoy to do, even better, right?
Yep.
Because you're going to have fun and you're going to learn. And be curious, very good point. I think it's very important to expand your knowledge base, because if you're a specialist in just one thing, um, it's very hard to solve different problems. But on the other hand, if you have expanded your knowledge, then you have a more expanded view. Therefore, you can solve more problems more easily, which is very important um, to for every developer.
Another thing that I think is worth mentioning on this question is principal engineer probably also depends on the company. So if you look at different companies, they will have different definition of what is a principal. Maybe if I go to work for AWS, I wouldn't even be considered a principal, but just a senior engineer, just because there the expectation is much higher. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Like depending which companies are you currently in or which companies are you applying for, maybe the bar to become a principal engineer might be higher or lower. So of course, try to calibrate your expectation based on that as well. Doesn't mean that if you go to AWS and you are a senior that you are not, you couldn't be a principal engineer somewhere else. And this is probably true for every level, not just for principal or senior, of course.
For every level, that's for sure. Yeah, very well said. Very good point. Because, like you said, I every company has their concept of a role in a kind of a different way, but the essence of the role is basically the same for every company.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Then, so I'm also curious to know, Luciano, what are your daily routines? Do you practice, for example, technology every day? Do you have a special routine where you practice your skills and refine your skills?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And to be fair, I'm terrible with routines. I get bored very easily, so I very easily change my routine. So sometimes I try to have a routine, and then after maybe a few weeks, I kind of change it just because I get bored. So, but this is my personal problem, and I'm not suggesting that this is a good practice to do. I think it's in general it is good to have a routine. It doesn't have to be too strict. So in that sense, maybe there are things that I do quite often. For instance, I try to read something, maybe it's just hacker news, and then it's kind of random topics of what's new in technology, what are, I don't know, some new languages or frameworks or ideas, patterns, whatever. And maybe just having that, even just half an hour every day, either in the morning or in the evening, where you explore that, it's something that at least could give you a feeling of where the world of technology is going, and if there are new things that might be worth investing on. For instance, if you read Hacker News and Reddit, recently lots of people are talking about Rust. And funny enough, there aren't many Rust experts. So it seems that everyone is learning Rust. Everyone is interested in Rust. So maybe there are good use cases. Maybe it's a good investment. I don't know. I think we'll know that in 5-10 years, right?
Yeah.
But it's only that it's a signal that could be important for you to just explore and see if you actually like the technology and if you want to be willing to spend more time learning it. So I think I generally do that. But
Oh,
again, I wouldn't have like the strongest routine where I do that every day at a certain time. It's more of an attitude than a routine, I think.
okay. Yeah. This I would consider that as a routine because you're doing that every day. So
Um, I try to do it often enough, but not like in a very kind of controlled way. So in that sense, I
Okay.
don't have the best routine ever. It's something I try to do, but effort, not by habit, let's say.
Okay, so maybe you are more of the burst style. Like you, when you start something, you work very heavily on that,
Mm-hmm.
and then you stop for some time, and then you do another a burst of work.
That's probably a good way of describing me. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go to the next questions. What is the approach of a principal engineer with problems at work? Again, I think this question is very generic, but do you remember one problem that was kind of tricky to solve in your experience? And what was your approach to solve it?
Yeah, so I can mention one specific problem. I don't know if it's something that necessarily characterize a principal engineer work. It's probably more
Yeah.
my experience, but it's something where I think I learned a lot, and probably I took a decision in the end, which is not the decision I was expecting at the beginning. So maybe it's interesting, and probably as a principal engineer, you need to be able to question your own instincts as well, or validate your own instincts as well. So this was specifically in my previous company, where we were building a data pipeline that was processing like terabytes every day. And it was mostly like network data, because that was a security company. And basically, this pipeline was written using serverless technologies and mostly Node.js. And at some point, we realized that some specific parts of this pipeline were particularly slow. They were becoming kind of the bottleneck for the growth of the scale of that specific system. And basically, we kind of spend a little bit, I personally spent a little bit of time trying to troubleshoot where exactly was being slow. And then eventually I realized that the bottleneck was a library that was deserializing data from a specific format. Uh, it's not a very common format. It's called cap and proto. It's similar to proto buffer, but there are some specific differences which are very interesting. I recommend people that are curious about this stuff to check it out, because it's an interesting technology, but it's not a very famous technology. So there weren't a lot of libraries out there. And I had kind of this dilemma of, I have two options. Either I have to write a new library that it's more performant, because that original library was more of a proof of concept. And even the guy that wrote the library was saying, I didn't do any performance, so probably you shouldn't be using this library. But it was just the only library doing that in Node.js. So the option was, okay, let's maybe fix this library, make it better, or implement a new one, or change the language and implement that specific piece of the pipeline in another language, which maybe had a better support for that specific operation. So I did spend like a week or 2 weeks. I think I did I did a 2 weeks spike to try to figure out what can be the best solution. And in these 2 weeks, I did spend like more than a week just trying to do like a proof of concept of rewriting a library from scratch. And
Mm-hmm.
I did rewrite like 20% of the protocol, and it was already like 4 times faster. So I was
Whoa.
like, oh, this is a great progress. I can probably do this, and this is probably the right choice, and it's going to be amazing and super fast. And then I had like the last 3 days, I think, of my spike, where I said, okay, but there is still the other option, which I haven't explored. And maybe it's even better than this one. So I decided to spend those last 3 days of my spike by trying to rewrite something using Go. And I didn't even know Go that well at the time. I just read a few articles, and I barely knew the syntax. But I just wanted to try it, just to have a feeling if the other path was feasible and how much effort would it be. And I was surprised that in 3 days I implemented everything, and it was 10 times faster, which
Awesome.
is something totally unexpected for me. And maybe also I was lucky, just because Go, it's such a simple language to learn at the beginning, but it's not something that I did expect. And probably if I wouldn't have tried those 3 days to do this exercise, I would never learn that yes, learning Go is easy, and the library was very good, and you can get the job done 100% in a short amount of time. So that was a case where, again, I don't know if this is a skill of a principal engineer, but basically because I was questioning my own decision and I forced myself to try the other path, I did learn something new, and at the end of the day I changed my mind and I picked a different solution. So that's maybe a skill that I would expect a principal engineer to be able to have. In whenever you are facing a very hard problem, don't just take anything for granted. Try to explore a little bit of all the different options, and then when you have gathered enough evidence, you should be able to take a better decision, which probably is not going to be the first instinct you had.
Amazing. That's really, really powerful. Like you learned one language in 3 days.
Yeah, I don't think I can say I learned Go in 3 days, but definitely I solved that specific problem. I learned enough Go so that I could solve that specific problem in 3 days.
Amazing.
And maybe rebuilding that library would have taken me 3 months. Still wouldn't have been as performant as Go, just because different languages, different features. And maybe would have been more buggy because, of course, rebuilding an entire library, which is a complicated protocol, there are so many edge cases that you are going to discover only over time. So just using that library and that other language was probably even a safer choice, not just faster one.
Awesome. That's amazing. That's definitely yeah, tough problem that you faced, and you solved it with when I'm like very good solution.
And
Amazing
by the
stuff.
way, just
I
to
can
clarify, the 3 days it was almost feature complete, but of course it wasn't like the whole work. Then not just myself, but also other people worked on that project for other few weeks just to rebuild all the pipeline and all the necessary things that you have to build around a new project, especially if you are changing the language and the framework. So I had that proof of concept that was working. I was able to benchmark, and yes, works as expected. It is faster, but then of course there was more work needed to make it production ready, essentially.
amazing. 10 times faster. That's great results.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so Luciano, we are arriving at the end of our interview. And the last question for you is what are your goals for your career in the next 5 years?
That's a good one. So I don't know if I have a straight answer to this. I think I'm still trying to clarify that with myself, and it's probably going to change depending on which day you ask. But I think I
Fine.
have a feeling that I still need to grow a lot as an engineer. So I still have a lot to learn. Like, definitely I'm not at my peak. There is still a long way to go. So of course, I want to invest time learning new things and working on new projects so that I can build more and more experience. And that for me means like being very hands-on, so building things and exploring problems and trying to, I don't know, write code and design infrastructure, whatever it takes to kind of ship new things. In that sense, I still see myself in the future as more of an engineer than a manager. Like, again, I don't think I'm going to take the management path anytime soon. I don't know if that means staying like a principal engineer for a long time and working on different projects, or if there is going to be at some point a space where I have learned enough of architecture that I can become an architect, but at the same time be very hands-on. So that probably is going to depend on the company as well. So my goal is just to kind of keep learning and then be involved in building things, and then we'll see where that is going to lead me in the next 5 years. I mean, one thing I want maybe worth clarifying is that I don't think there is anything wrong with management. It's just I don't feel that is the right path for me. I have seen managers in the past. I was very lucky to work with few managers with amazing technical skills, like people that were very, very good managers, but also you can go to them and say, I have this very hard technical problem. What do we do? And you will get amazing solutions. So there is definitely a space for people to be both amazing managers and both amazing technically. But again, I just think that in many companies, when you are a manager, you have so many tasks in terms of managing people and communication that you wouldn't have a lot of time to do hands-on type of things. So that's not the career that I want to build for myself right now. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that there is nothing wrong with that career, even as an engineer. It's just make sure that is what you want to do or not, because it's going to be very different from being very hands-on most of the time.
Awesome. So have you ever considered about being a CIO or CEO or uh, like to be at this position in a company, or you really don't think about that right now?
Maybe in a small startup, I could see myself doing that. Like it's a very early stage startup. I could probably cover that role. But again, just because I suppose if you are like a CTO in a startup, you have to do a lot of the groundwork anyway. So it's more
CTO.
just of the title of, yes, you are the responsible one, but you are also building it. So maybe I could see myself in that case, but I wouldn't be able to be the CTO in a big company for sure. Like I don't have that experience. That requires a lot more management type of experience, which I don't have right now.
Awesome then. So that's it, Luciano. Thanks a lot for accepting the invitation for the interview. And again, guys, you can download, you can get Luciano's book. No,
Actually, I'm gonna show it
yeah,
here just to show it's real.
yeah, Node.js design patterns, and you can learn a lot about the patterns with Node.js. And like we are saying here, it's very important to know more than one language. And Luciano wrote this book. It's an amazing book. You can consume this book. You can learn a lot, and you can also follow Luciano on Lloyd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lloyd dot it's at Lloyd. I will put on the description of this video, and there is also the blog site from Luciano, which is lloyd.co. I'm gonna put all the links in the description of the video, and then you can access the content from Luciano, and then you can improve your software engineer skills, and so that we can go to the next level.
By the way, thank you again very, very much for having me. It was a great pleasure and great fun. So I hope you did enjoy it as much as I did.
I enjoyed a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot. So, and I'm sure that the Java Challenge audience is they're gonna learn a lot as well. So that's amazing. So thanks a lot for accepting and talking to us here, Luciano. And I'm gonna put all the contact details with from Luciano. And if you want to contact Luciano, feel free to reach out to him.
Absolutely. I'm happy to take questions even later if I can answer, of course. I'll try my best.
Yeah. Okay, man. So that's it, man. Thanks a lot.
Hello everyone, if you enjoyed the video with Luciano talking about his path to become a principal engineer, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more amazing videos, and as always, be constantly breaking your limits. See you the next time.